Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet is the story, really the story of the Japanese internment in Seattle. But it's seen through the eyes of Henry Lee, who's a 12-year-old Chinese boy who was sent to an all-white private school by his parents to become more American. And there he meets Keiko, who is sent by her parents for the same reason. She's a Japanese-American girl. And this very innocent friendship and love develops between them. But it's also the story of Henry as a grown man. So half the story takes place in the 40s and half takes place in the 80s. And he, at some point in his past, loses Keiko, loses his first love. And so it's the story of Henry reflecting on the decisions he made as a child, reflecting on the things he did or didn't do, or said or didn't say. And the story of Henry longing and eventually searching for Keiko again. The idea behind Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet started in the short story, and the short story was about this iconic item, and it was a button that my father, who growing up as a Chinese American, wore after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. It was given to him by his parents to wear, and a lot of the kids in the neighborhood wore them, and it read, "I am Chinese." That button became really iconic, and it was really the centerpiece of the story, and he's wanting to give her this button to prevent her from being taken away, from going to the internment camps. The character of Henry, he lives in this strange world where he's sort of a stranger in his own home, and he's an outcast at school. And he's also, on top of that, is rebelling against his father, who's this very nationalist, very strict Chinese immigrant who hasn't quite left China in his heart. And rebelling against him, he embraces what a lot of people thought was a bit of the counterculture at the time, which was jazz. It was a new music that was being played at clubs. It was a little bit of the unknown, and it was a little bit of the forbidden. And it's a great way for Henry to rebel against his parents, who are sort of against anything new and anything different. The hotel itself is called the Panama Hotel, and why it was called the Panama Hotel when it was owned and operated by a Japanese businessman and built by a Japanese architect, I really don't know. What people don't realize is that in the basement of the Panama Hotel, there are the belongings of 37 Japanese families that are still there, relatively untouched. These families were given really just a couple days to sell or pack up everything that they had. They sold it for pennies on the dollar, or they stored it in the basements of buildings or churches and things like that. And so we have Henry sort of stumbling upon something that he recognizes as belonging to Keiko, his long-lost love, and it sort of triggers this desire to go back and look at a period of his life that he had sort of paved over because it was too painful to remember, and now he's forced to confront that. My mom was Caucasian, but my Chinese grandmother was fairly traditional. I remember her teaching my mother how to cook Chinese food and talking about, you should always have bitter dishes and sweet dishes together to remind you of the joy and sorrow in life. And it's, speaking of this sort of hackneyed Confucianism that only an 80-year-old Chinese woman can kind of get away with. And as I looked at the story, it really is a story that's sad and happy. That some people favor the love story, some people favor the complicated family story between Henry and his father, and then later his own son, Marty. Other people just like the fact that we're illuminating a part of history that's sort of been glossed over and swept under the rug a little bit. There's regret and remorse, but there's also joy in it. And I think one without the other is kind of empty. And so the story hopefully reflects both of those elements.